I never imagined the people I loved most, my own daughter, Jessica, and her husband, Ryan, could betray me so completely. For years I had worked tirelessly, investing over $1 million in properties, building a secure future for my family. I had kept some of it hidden, knowing that while love is priceless, greed can appear even in the closest of hearts. I believed my daughter loved me unconditionally, and that Ryan, as my son-in-law, respected me. But life has a way of revealing truths we're too blind to see. It began subtly. While I was hospitalized for a serious condition, Jessica and Ryan started asking questions about my finances. Questions that seemed innocent at first, like concern. But the way they lingered on certain details, the little smirks Ryan would exchange when he thought I wasn't looking, began to set off alarms in my mind. I realized they weren't interested in my health or well-being. They were calculating. They were plotting. One evening, while resting in the hospital bed, I overheard them speaking in hushed tones outside my room. "She doesn't know about the Westwood property yet," Ryan whispered. "Soon it will all be ours," Jessica replied, her voice dripping with greed. My chest tightened, not from illness but from anger. Every word, every plan was a knife twisting in my heart. They believed I was too weak, too ill, and too naive to notice. But I was very much aware. My body may have been vulnerable, but my mind was sharper than ever. I spent the following nights recalling every small incident that hinted at their intentions. The way Ryan tried to manipulate my old bank accounts. Jessica's sudden fascination with legal forms, their attempts to pressure me into signing documents I didn't understand. Each moment was now crystal clear, like pieces of a puzzle forming an image of their betrayal. As I was discharged from the hospital, the real test began. I returned home pretending to be fragile, allowing them to feel triumphant. Jessica greeted me with a forced smile while Ryan's arrogance was palpable, assuming they had won. But behind my calm exterior, I was already planning. This wasn't about confrontation yet. This was about preparation. I needed evidence. Every email, every contract, every attempt to manipulate my wealth. I reached out to George Miller, a longtime family friend, and Helen Crawford, a trusted lawyer who had seen my diligence over the years. I quietly gathered proof of every scheme Jessica and Ryan had attempted, documenting each lie, each manipulation. The more I discovered, the more I realized the depths of their greed. They didn't just want a share. They wanted it all, believing my illness gave them the right. At night, when the house was silent, I would sit in my study, reviewing the files I had collected. I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and resolve. Sorrow for the betrayal of my own daughter, and resolve for the plan I would soon execute. They thought they had control, but what they didn't know was that patience, preparation, and strategy are far more powerful than greed and arrogance. And in that quiet determination, I realized something important. I would not just reclaim what was mine. I would teach Jessica and Ryan a lesson they would never forget. Their betrayal had awakened a strength within me they had underestimated. A father's resolve, sharpened by pain, fueled by justice, and ready to strike. Little did they know the game had just begun. After returning home, I acted weaker than ever. Jessica and Ryan walked through the door with triumphant smiles, assuming they had already won. I let them think that. Every step I took, every word I spoke, was calculated to give them a false sense of victory. They didn't suspect that I had already begun preparing a plan that would turn the tables completely. First, I secured my hidden assets. The $1 million in properties I had carefully concealed was now legally protected. I worked with Helen Crawford, my trusted lawyer, to ensure that every transaction, every account, and every title deed was untouchable. It wasn't enough to simply reclaim what they had attempted to take. I needed proof that they had tried to steal, so there would be no doubt when the reckoning came. Next, I gathered evidence. Emails, financial records, even recordings of whispered conversations were meticulously compiled. Jessica and Ryan had been careless. Their arrogance and greed made them sloppy. Every lie, every plan to manipulate my wealth had been documented. I knew the law could now work in my favor, but legal action alone was not enough. I wanted them to feel the weight of their betrayal. So I began planting subtle warnings, misplaced files, documents that seemed lost, hints that someone was watching. The small victories they believed they had were carefully undermined, creating a psychological pressure they didn't understand. Anxiety crept into their confident smiles, and I observed it with quiet satisfaction. I also enlisted the help of George Miller, a loyal friend who had known me for decades. George became my eyes and ears, discreetly ensuring that any attempt by Jessica and Ryan to access my hidden wealth would be detected immediately. The duo thought they were invisible, but in reality, every move they made was being silently monitored. During this time, I played the role of the frail, trusting father. I allowed them to continue thinking they were in control, laughing and plotting in front of me. They assumed my illness had made me weak, that I was incapable of challenging them. I let them enjoy this illusion. Their overconfidence was my greatest weapon. Every night I reviewed my plan, visualizing the moment when I would finally confront them. I imagined the shock on Jessica's face when she realized her manipulations had been anticipated, the panic in Ryan's eyes as their control slipped away. I had waited for years to see them take advantage of me, and now patience and strategy had put me in the position of ultimate power. I reminded myself constantly, this wasn't just about money, it was about respect, trust, and justice. They had treated their father like a pawn, believing that love and sacrifice were weaknesses to exploit. They had underestimated me, and that would be their undoing. The foundation was laid, evidence secured, allies ready, and traps quietly set. Jessica and Ryan had no idea that their perceived victory was only temporary. The reckoning was coming, and when it did, it would be absolute. And in that silence, I felt a calm determination. I would not just reclaim my fortune, I would make sure they understood, in the deepest way possible, what it meant to betray their father. The game was no longer about survival, it was about justice, and my turn was about to begin. Weeks passed quietly, each day feeling like a countdown to the moment when I would strike. Jessica and Ryan continued to believe they were in control, laughing over small victories they thought they had achieved. They bragged about deals they thought they had finalized, believing they were outsmarting a frail father. Little did they know, every step they took had been anticipated, every move documented, and every plan quietly dismantled. I decided it was time to begin the first stage of the confrontation. I invited Jessica and Ryan to discuss the final arrangements of my estate. They arrived smiling and confident, expecting to enjoy another small triumph over me. Their arrogance was intoxicating, and it was exactly what I needed. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice calm, almost fragile. "I know it's been a difficult time for all of us, and I appreciate your patience." I leaned back in my chair, portraying the vulnerability they expected. Jessica smiled, her eyes glinting with the thrill of imagined victory, while Ryan's smirk seemed to say, "We've got this." Then I revealed the first layer of my plan. Documents were laid out on the table, deeds, bank statements, and correspondence proving their attempts to manipulate and steal from me. Jessica's smile faltered as her eyes widened, scanning the files. Ryan's confident posture wavered, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for a paper. You knew," Jessica whispered, disbelief evident in her voice. "I knew more than you could imagine," I replied, my tone calm but firm. "Every attempt, every whisper, every scheme has been documented. The Westwood property, the Willow Creek investment, the accounts you thought were untraceable, all secured, all protected, and all recorded." Ryan tried to speak, to argue, but I continued, showing them the evidence of their betrayal. The look of panic on their faces was slow, deliberate, and perfect. They realized the arrogance that had blinded them, the overconfidence that had made them sloppy. Every small trick they had attempted now stood as proof against them. I had prepared allies to ensure this confrontation could not be ignored. George Miller and Helen Crawford were nearby, silently, observing, ready to intervene if necessary. The duo's sense of control shattered further as they understood the full scope of my preparation. "You believed weakness was yours to exploit," I said, meeting their eyes with steady intensity. But patience, careful planning, and respect for the truth have allowed me to turn the tables. You've taken my trust, my fortune, and my sacrifices for granted. Now, you will face the consequences. Jessica began to plead, her voice trembling with fear and desperation. Ryan attempted rationalization, but their words fell flat. Every move they had made, every attempt at deceit was now a weapon in my hands. Their arrogance had been their undoing, and they could no longer manipulate the situation to their advantage. As the meeting concluded, I allowed them to leave, shaken and humiliated. I wanted them to feel the weight of betrayal and the consequences of greed, not just in one confrontation, but in every moment that followed. The psychological pressure was just as important as reclaiming my fortune. They needed to understand the depth of their betrayal. That night, as I sat alone in my study, I felt a mix of relief and determination. The first stage of my plan had succeeded. Jessica and Ryan were shaken, vulnerable, and aware that their father was no longer the man they could manipulate. But this was only the beginning. The final layers of my revenge, the complete reclamation of justice and dignity were yet to come. And in the quiet of my home, I whispered to myself, "You underestimated me. You betrayed me. Now, you will learn the cost of taking a father's trust for granted." After the confrontation, Jessica and Ryan left my home visibly shaken. I watched from my study window as their confident strides faltered into hesitant steps. Their arrogance had been stripped away in a single afternoon, replaced with the creeping weight of fear and guilt. The realization that their father had outsmarted them was devastating, and I allowed it to sink in fully. Over the next few days, subtle signs of panic emerged. Jessica repeatedly called my office, trying to negotiate, trying to downplay her actions. Ryan attempted to manipulate mutual friends and colleagues, hoping someone would intervene on their behalf. But their efforts only revealed their desperation. Every lie, every excuse, every attempt to regain control became more obvious. I watched, quietly, never responding to their frantic messages. Each attempt they made to regain dominance was carefully recorded. Their trust in each other began to fracture under the pressure. Small arguments erupted over trivial matters. Who should call the lawyer? Who should sign documents? Who had made a mistake? The couple who once operated as a united front now stumbled over their own deceit. Their mistakes became my tools. I sent quiet warnings, legal notices, letters hinting at oversight, and subtle reminders that I was watching. They tried to bypass these measures, but each effort triggered another safeguard I had secretly put in place. Their every move, meant to deceive me, now only strengthened my position. I felt no gloating in these moments. This was not about cruelty. It was about teaching Jessica and Ryan the value of respect, trust, and consequence. They had believed that illness and weakness equated to vulnerability. They had underestimated a father's resolve. And now they were learning the hard truth. Betrayal has a price, and the more they struggled, the higher the cost became. By the end of the week, the cracks in their confidence were undeniable. Their once bold gestures were replaced with hesitation, their confident smirks replaced with anxiety. The duo who had tried to seize my fortune was now being quietly dismantled by the very person they had sought to overpower. In the quiet of my home, I finally allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The first phase of revenge had worked. They had learned that underestimating a father's patience and intelligence is a mistake that can change everything. The game was far from over, but the foundation had been set. The lesson had begun. The following weeks were crucial. Jessica and Ryan were still reeling from our confrontation, but I knew patience was my greatest weapon. Their arrogance had been shattered, yet they continued to probe, trying to find a way to regain control. I allowed them to believe they were making progress, while every move they made only tightened the net I had woven around them. I began to enforce the legal protections I had prepared. All my properties, once thought vulnerable, were now fully secured. Any attempt by Jessica or Ryan to access accounts was blocked, leaving them frustrated and confused. Their panic grew each day as they realized that their previous manipulations had failed. Every email they sent, every phone call they made, became another piece of evidence to reinforce their failure. Meanwhile, I escalated the psychological aspect of my plan. I created subtle scenarios that forced them to question each other's loyalty. Ryan grew suspicious of Jessica's decisions while Jessica doubted Ryan's judgment. Their unity began to crumble. I watched quietly, knowing that a betrayed duo fractured from within was far easier to control than one still confident in their cunning. Then came the moment to remind them who truly held power. I invited them to my home again under the guise of a family discussion about future plans. As they entered, their faces betrayed a mixture of hope and trepidation. They had begun to believe they could negotiate their way back into favor. I started by revealing new evidence, recent attempts they had made to circumvent my protections, bank transfers, forged signatures, and clandestine meetings, all meticulously documented and legally secured. The shock on their faces was immediate. Jessica's hands trembled, and Ryan's confident voice cracked. I calmly explained that every action they had taken had been anticipated, every scheme foiled, and every legal safeguard in place. "You underestimated me," I said, my voice firm. "You believed my illness meant weakness. You thought my love for you would blind me. But patience, preparation, and vigilance are stronger than greed and deceit. Every attempt to steal from me has only strengthened my resolve." Their pleas were frantic now, but they were powerless. The alliances I had built, the legal protections I had established, and the psychological pressure I had applied left them with no options. They were forced to confront the full scope of their betrayal and the consequences they could not escape. Over the next days, I monitored their behavior carefully. Anxiety replaced confidence. Fear replaced arrogance. Jessica and Ryan could no longer act as one. Suspicion and tension poisoned every interaction between them. I allowed them to feel the weight of their choices, knowing that real lessons are learned through consequence, not lecture. In the quiet of my study, I reflected on the progress. My fortune was fully secure, my legacy intact, and the arrogant duo that had tried to take everything from me was now humbled. But beyond the wealth, the true victory was in restoring balance, teaching a lesson they would carry forever. The foundation had been laid, the first wave of justice delivered. I knew the final reckoning was still ahead, a moment that would leave Jessica and Ryan forever aware of the consequences of betrayal. And as I sat in my study, I allowed myself a single thought. They had underestimated their father, and that mistake would define the rest of their lives. The time had come. Jessica and Ryan were already shaken from the previous encounters, but I knew this final stage needed precision. It wasn't just about reclaiming my wealth. It was about teaching a lasting lesson, exposing the full truth and making them face the consequences of betraying their own father. I invited them once more, this time under the pretense of discussing remaining personal matters. Their confidence was fragile, but they walked in with tentative hope, believing perhaps they could still salvage some control. Their smiles were tight, their eyes wary. I let them settle into the room, acting frail and weak, giving them the illusion that their victory was still within reach. Then I began. One by one, I revealed the entire scope of their betrayal. Every attempt to access hidden accounts, every forged signature, every secret meeting they had held in my absence. Everything was documented, verified, and presented in a way that left no room for denial. I could see their shock deepen with each revelation. Jessica's face turned pale, and Ryan's hand shook as he tried to explain, to negotiate, to manipulate. "You thought you could take everything while I was vulnerable," I said calmly, my voice resonating with the weight of years of sacrifice and endurance. "You thought illness and age made me powerless. You were wrong. Every act, every whisper, every plan, I anticipated it all." I unveiled the next layer of my plan. Legal actions had been silently executed. All properties, accounts, and investments were now fully under protection. Any attempt to access or sell was blocked. The fortune they had assumed would be theirs was untouchable. Their panic was immediate, their arrogance dissolved. They had nothing left. But I wanted them to feel the depth of their betrayal beyond material loss. I exposed how their actions had hurt the people around them, mutual friends, family, and even employees who had trusted them. The psychological weight of their deceit began to crush them. Suspicion between them grew. Ryan accused Jessica of mismanagement, while Jessica questioned Ryan's judgment. The couple who once operated as a unified front was now fractured and vulnerable. I watched in quiet satisfaction as they realized that their attempts to manipulate me had backfired at every level. They were powerless to reverse the outcome, unable to reclaim what they had tried to steal. The lesson was clear. Betrayal carries a cost, and those who take love and trust for granted must face the consequences. Finally, I spoke, my voice soft but resolute. Jessica, Ryan, the wealth was never just money. It was trust, love, and the sacrifices of a lifetime. You ignored that. You betrayed your father. And now, you understand the price of your greed. Tears streamed down Jessica's face and Ryan's confident facade shattered completely. They had underestimated me, and in doing so they had sealed their own defeat. The lesson was complete. Not only had I reclaimed what was mine, but I had also restored balance and dignity. As they left my home that evening, defeated and humbled, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. My fortune was secure, my legacy intact, and my patience vindicated. Revenge had not been about cruelty, but about justice, teaching, and reclaiming respect that had been ignored for too long. I sat alone, reflecting on the journey. Betrayal by one's own blood is the deepest pain a parent can endure, but even in the darkest moments, patience, strategy, and resolve can turn weakness into strength. Jessica and Ryan had learned the cost of betrayal, and I had reclaimed not just my wealth but my dignity, my pride, and my peace.